Uber drivers of Reddit, what's the creepiest, weirdest, and/or most bizarre passenger experience you've had? About a year ago I was driving a little before midnight and picked up someone in a somewhat run-down part of town. The guy gets in the back and didn't respond to my greeting. He was wearing a really awkward black coat of some sort which had pink fuzz lined on the shoulders and arms. The first thing I noticed was an absolutely overbearing stench of straight-up shit. I started to sniff and cough because it was so powerful and rancid. He began to quietly snicker, and I could see a grin form on his face with the little lights I had in the back of the car. He had a massive nose and very rubbery features. I said, "Hey man, what's with that smell? It's making me sick." He looked up into the rearview mirror and I could see his eyes were bloodshot. He was staring at me in the mirror with this creepy smile. He softly said, "Just open the window and keep driving." He began digging in his backpack and pulled a phone out, turned the flashlight on and pointed it at his chest. He opened his coat and I saw what looked like some type of writing and symbols of mud all over his chest. He was holding his phone with one hand and picking this mud off his chest. Then he loudly barked, "Have you ever been to a scat party? If not, then shut your damn mouth." Just then we rolled up to a red light. He cackled loudly and ran out of the car into the woods. I was completely dumbfounded in disbelief. I got out and looked in the back seat where I found his backpack and this dried shit he had picked off his chest. I opened the backpack and there it was full of shit-covered clothes. I immediately went home, cleaned my car, got soup. My second night driving ever. 2 a.m. Pulled up to a clearing in the woods in the middle of Denville, New Jersey. I had to go partially off-road to get to the spot. I don't even know how it showed up on my map. I pull up to a spot that looks like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's a busted old barn that's dry-rotted and falling apart, and there is the rear bucket of a landscaping truck hanging from a tree filled with beer cans. I mean filled. Like this but minus the truck. All of a sudden I see my rider come out of the woods, chugging a beer with his other hand in the air signaling to me. He gets in and doesn't say a word. We start driving, and I go, "How was your night, man?" just to break the awkwardness. He responded very, normally, "Good man, just hung out with some friends at the bar, got really drunk and met some chicks. Then we all went out into the parking lot and dropped acid." Oh, wow. Now I'm wondering if this dude is hallucinating, that I'm Satan taking him to hell in my Honda Pilot Demon Chariot. So how did you end up in the woods, man? There are no bars near where I picked you up. He was completely silent, didn't say a word. I glanced into the rearview mirror and he was dead staring into my fucking soul. I looked back at the road. At this point we were in a pretty well-populated area, so I felt safer. He was silent for the remaining 14 minutes of the ride until about 2 minutes from his destination he asked me if we could stop at the convenience store on the way. I obliged and he asked if I wanted anything. I declined, and as I dropped him off he gave me a really nice $10 tip and said, "Thanks, Maria. I'm a dude." The second worst was last year. I was borderline sexually assaulted by another dude, but that wasn't really weird, just scary. 3 a.m. Drive up to an old bar. Guy and his friend get in and immediately start laughing. I don't question, because I figured they were drunk, and from the smell, stoned too. About halfway to their destination, the guy's friend asked me for my wallet because he left his driver's license in it. I started laughing because that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. My friend a few months prior bought a new wallet and left his old one in my car, so I put a single dollar in it and handed it to him. He hopped out of the car and ran a few feet away before saying, "What the hell? $1? You're broke as hell." Picked up a girl at a motel and she was going to another motel, prostitute. She said she wanted me to pull up to the room and she'd give me $10 to wait 5 minutes. If she came up within 5 minutes we'd leave and go somewhere else. Said she was nervous about this. She gives me $10, goes in. Comes out like 2 minutes later and asks me to take her to a Waffle House. She offered me a $20 tip and asked me if I wanted to eat with her. I said sure, since it was like 4 a.m. and the night was dying down anyway. Left her at the Waffle House and went home. Some interesting stories. Just for a positive weird one, ended up becoming a close family friend to 3 generations of an immigrant family. Grandpa was the only one to order a ride through Uber proper, enjoyed talking to me, and decided he'd rather just pay cash to have me come get him to run errands. Not that weird of a request, and it was summer in a college town, not a bad deal. He was there hashing out details for his granddaughter about to move to town, figured, correctly, I'd get along well with his daughter who didn't know anyone in the area. Arranged it so I'd get them to from the airport for cash whenever one flew in, and over time he was right. Friends with her now, dude's wife loves talking to me too from the airport, and even the little granddaughter asks about me if she hasn't seen me for a while. Drove for about a year, and that's the most interesting story I have from it for sure. Was driving an afternoon in the late summer. I live in a beach town, so it was perfect weather and people everywhere. Went to a pickup and saw a guy and 2 women. Picked them up, and they clearly had been day drinking, just laughing and having a good time. It was a husband and wife and the wife's cousin. They all were clearly sexed up a little from the booze, joking about having sex, the husband and wife. The guy makes a joke to his wife's cousin saying, "If I had met you first we'd be married." Then the wife said to the cousin, "If you weren't my cousin I'd let you join in when we get home." The guy and the cousin starting laughing their asses off, and the guy said to the cousin, "I wouldn't mind if you didn't." They all laughed like crazy until I got to their house a few blocks away. This was only maybe a 5-minute drive. Between the fare and tip I made about $7. Was definitely worth it. I'll gladly drive them again if I see them this summer. This is from a few months ago, still gives me shakes. Went to pick up an Austin in New Jersey. It was about 2 a.m, so it's my last ride. He's a little far out, but not awful. I'm pretty rural anyway. I meet him at his spot near the woods, and he's in some sort of gown. Almost like a graduation gown, but it wasn't black. He then waves, and 4 fucking kids, around 10, come out in solid white with another person in a gown just like his, and they all climb and they are all silent other than Austin, who is giving a monologue on the importance of some animal they were with. After about 10 minutes, I look back, and I shit you not, every single kid was glaring at me in my rearview mirror. All. Frickin'. 4. Immediately Austin asks to halt the ride and asks for a new drop-off, about 2 minutes away. Pretty confident the other gent in the gown was staring at me too, but I couldn't see his eyes. I tremble and ask him to update the app. He says he won't, as it's a discreet location. I'm shivering and do that trick where you call a friend and let them listen in. I get to the location and they all pile out, except for that Austin guy who looks at me dead in the eyes, then at my upside down phone, then back at my eyes. He then got out and went into the woods. WTF man. Repost from my history. I woke the dead with ACDC's It's a Long Way to the Top. If you wanna rock and roll. St. Patrick's Day. I get a bunch of drunk college ladies in my car. The 3 in back are cheerful drunks, chatting and laughing. The one riding next to me is motionless. For the first 20 minutes of the trip, this woman doesn't move a muscle. Her phone is on her lap, but she isn't looking at it or touching the screen at all. Having had similar situations before, my concern was that she would revive in a spontaneous shower of vomit. Instead, as we're heading into the downtown tunnel, the aforementioned song pops up on my playlist. Dr. Frankenstein would have killed for the resulting resurrection. The previously motionless young lady gasps loudly, shoots forward in her seat, and eagerly asks me to turn it up. I nearly drove into the wall of the tunnel. The rest of the trip was spent telling me how she was a huge fan of Jack Black and how she recognized the song from School of Rock. Doctor playing AC/DC cures drunk people like a flick of the switch. Not in Uber, but I used to drive a taxi in a semi-rural area. Many of the customers were regulars, so usually quite uneventful. However, it was near a few resorts which were quite upmarket, so the weirdos were generally of a higher class. Picked up a couple from a wedding reception for a long trip. One rule I had was to let the passengers initiate conversation. So, besides the usual pleasantries, nothing, which is unusual for a couple. I heard some kissing, pretty common, then some movement, and before long I realized these two were fucking. I recall there being an old towel in the boot. Don't ask, I was the driver not the owner. I said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but if I pull over and stop the meter, I can get you both a towel. And they're like, why? We renting anything? So I said okay, well I'm pretty relaxed with what goes on here. Legally you can't drink in a cab, but I allow it as long as the person takes the empties, and if you wanted to continue with your activities, I'm going to need to give you guys a towel. If there's any mess, I have to charge a cleaning fee on top of what's already going to be a long fare otherwise. After a few seconds I hear alright then. So I get it out the boot, pass it over, and get driving again. $120 fare, the guy gives me $150 and tells me to keep it. They weren't nasty, I think they just thought they were being secret. I drove a cab in the ghetto in the 90s. This stuff doesn't even rate on a week-to-week basis. I had a guy get in my cab once with a large woman's purse full of crack cocaine. I don't mean he had a lot of crack, I mean he had 1-gallon Ziploc bag full of crack stuffed into a giant women's handbag. Big spender though, he tipped me in powder cocaine. Do you think I told the police? Hell no, because in the 90s in the ghetto that's how people got murdered. I had a stripper get into a fight with a prostitute drug dealer over drug money that the stripper had hidden in her vagina. I had a passenger that decided my car would look better without its rear windows, so he laid down in the back seat and started kicking them out. I had to call the dispatcher on a CB to call the cops because I didn't have a cell phone, and then he attacked me. I had to take off my seatbelt, crawl out of the passenger door to get away from him, at which point he climbed over the seat and proceeded to try to hotwire my cab, mangle the wiring to the lights and dash controls until the cops arrived and maced him through the busted out back window. He screamed bloody murder like he was on fire and pissed himself in my driver's seat. I had a drunk try to rob me with a knife for the money. His friend, who was in the car, just paid me for the fare. The friend gets upset at knife-wielding guy, apologizes and tells me not to mind him because he's just crazy. The friend manages to talk the guy into getting out of the cab and then begs me not to call the police on them because he can't afford to go back to jail. And that's not even what made me decide to quit. That one was the time a pregnant hooker got in the car, told me she had HIV and that she needed to get away from where she was but had nowhere to go. Not necessarily in that order. I drove to a donut shop, went inside and got a phone book and called every church listed in the phone book. And not a single one of them would do anything for her. That's the only thing I could think of doing. I quit because I couldn't handle seeing so much misery every day and really nobody seemed to be doing a damn thing about it. Picked up a dude and his girlfriend in a well-known bar district early evening during the summer. Dude is fine, but GF is fucking wasted. I'm talking slurring speech, can't walk, etc. Dude tells me where he's going and I start the trip. As soon as I take off she says she wants to go back. Dude keeps telling her that they're going home, but she keeps saying, go back, go back, go back. Then she starts saying she doesn't feel well. I tell her that if she feels like she is going to throw up, let me know so I can pull over and let her out. She says pull over so I do. She gets out and then just starts cussing me out for no reason and kicks at my door and the side of the car, all while the dude is trying to hold her back. I take off and leave them there. First 1-star review I ever gave a pass. I have a passenger story about Uber. This was the middle of the day. We got in, and the car reeked of weed. The driver started the conversation off by saying how he would never get into a stranger's car because that is how you get murdered. We laughed and made some jokes, but he continued on and on about how you never know who has an axe in their trunk. We eventually just got quieter and quieter because he kept bringing up the murder. There were 4 of us, so I wasn't too scared because I figured he wouldn't be able to murder all of us during our 8-minute trip. We arrived safely, and I gave him 0 stars because the car smelled like weed. I was afraid he would find me and murder me if I told on him for the murder stuff lol. Passenger here. I know that's not what you asked for, but I'm telling it anyways. This driver creeped me the flip out. He picks me up then tells me we're going downtown, something I already knew, and I said correct. He then says it will take 20 minutes to get there, again, I knew this already. I was in another city and had no other means of transportation, so I told him I was good with that if he was. Away we go. Well, it wasn't long before I figured out why he was telling me things I knew already. Turns out he hated driving for the apps. Absolutely hated it. He made mention of wanting to drive the car into the ground. I nervously jokingly said, now we don't want to do that. He just kept telling me how much he hated it and even more so hated driving people downtown. Well, at this point, I am texting my coworker that I have left because I'm a bit afraid of this guy. I really thought he was having a breakdown. He continued to rant and rave about hating driving downtown, and hating driving to the airport. He proceeded to almost hit 2 people and tell me how he racially profiles people. He thought I would get a real kick out of that. Him being white racially profiling other whites because he didn't want to drive downtown or to the airport. Needless to say, I reported him. They told me I would never be matched with him again and further action would be taken, but they wouldn't say what that is. The man needs help and I hope he got it. TLDR, Lyft driver hated taking me to my destination, complained the whole way, and told me he, white, racially profiles people, other white people. For some time my boyfriend and I drove Uber TOGETHER I know, rules. We picked up this group of drunk people at a sketchy hotel close to midnight. They had thick Louisiana accents and were pretty difficult to understand, even for someone like myself from the south. There were 4 of them but only 3 available seats. They said we'll squish together if that's alright. So they all sat on top of each other in the back seat of my car. Before we left the parking lot one of the women in the group realized she forgot her phone in her hotel room. She asked us to pull up to where it was around back of the building, with the doors to each room being outside. When we did that we found a man mostly naked sitting outside of their room on the ground. The riders were so drunk they were just laughing at the situation, but the man was just laying there still. The woman got out to get her phone and another man appeared. The man and the woman rider helped this large unclothed man up off the ground and had to carry him in his room. The woman returned and said that the man on the ground was really drunk and just found out he has cancer. We drove them to a bar they wanted to drink at. The whole way they were yelling and laughing. One man kept talking about a raccoon in flip-flops. Then when we arrived they gave us a generous tip and we drove away. So I had a few weeks off between jobs a few years ago, so I decided to try Uber. The worst experience was at 3 AM I picked up 2 couples from the stretch of bars downtown after some big country concert. The guys were super nice, the one in the front seat even had the same first name as me, and we were chatting. Turns out that the guys met the girls at the bar and they were all heading back to the girls' hotel. About halfway through the ride one girl decided she wanted McDonald's, and since it was her Uber, it was the guys, I had to take her to McDonald's. The other girl said she didn't want McDonald's and she just wanted to get laid. They keep arguing and I keep talking to the guy in the front seat until the guy in the backseat tells me I need to pull over. I look back and see the girls fighting in my backseat. I pull over and we get the girls out. Somehow they got loose and started fighting again in the middle of the street. I call the cops and by the time the cop got there we have them separated again. McDonald's girl tried to bang her friend's head against the concrete. I tell the cop that it's McDonald's girl that is the aggressor, so he goes to arrest her and she starts resisting, so I help the cop restrain her. Once we get her in the backseat she starts trying to kick the windows out, so we get her back out of the car because the cop wanted to hog tie her. Finally 2 other cops show up and I'm relieved of my duties. She just kept yelling about how she's a lawyer and she wasn't read her Miranda rights. I turned off the app, took the 2 guys home and never gave another ride.